Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we explore the inner game of writing and life and inspire you to start, finish, and publish a best-selling book. My name's Mark DeVoe, and today I am in conversation with one of the most successful authors of all time, Dean Koontz. But before we dive in, I'm excited to share with you the launch of the Bestseller Experiment app. If you're new to the Bestseller Experiment, welcome, firstly, and you can experience the whole journey delivered to you in real time, starting with episode 1 on the app, and it'll keep you motivated, inspired week by week as you write. And for seasoned listeners and those wanting to binge, you can access over 500 episodes and interviews, including over 100 hours of deep dives and full-length shows on the app. What's more, by supporting the app, you're helping us share the Bestseller Experiment with other writers, inspiring them on their journey too. So if you'd like to find out more, pop along and try the app for free at bestsellerexperiment.com/app. So this week I'm in conversation with Dean Koontz, author of over 120 novels with over, you ready for this, 500 million sales to date. And that ranks him in the top 10 best-selling authors of all time. And in my research, I worked out that he's in the top 3 living authors of all time, which is an accolade that he shares with J.K. Rowling. So in this interview, we discuss the making of Dean's new novel, The Forest of Lost Souls, where Dean's book ideas come from, and how his book titles emerge. We have listener questions on plotting, research, and Dean's favourite books. And you'll also discover how Dean's torrid childhood and abusive father shaped the writer he is today. Plus, if you subscribe to the Bestseller Experiment app, you'll get the extended full interview where Dean shares about getting in the zone and what you should do when it happens. We deep dive into the spiritual experience of writing. Are you being written or writing? And Dean reveals the most important writing advice he ever got, which resulted in his incredible success. So let's dive in and enjoy this interview. Dean Koontz, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment.
Well, thanks for having me there.
It's absolutely lovely and such a treat to have you on the show. And what is also a massive treat is your new book, The Forest of Lost Souls, that I've been reading. Tell me about how that book came into fruition.
Often you don't know where a book comes from. And in this case, I knew I had written a series of books with a character named Jane Hawk. 5 books, and she was such a thrilling kind of lead character because she was just indomitable, and she was up against terrible things, but she was a person of great compassion, and I wanted to write another character of that nature, but in a different environment. Jane Hawk had the entire world against her. I want to write a story where it was more of an intimate threat, that the villains were maybe terrible, but on a smaller scale, and a character whose life had been lived on a smaller scale, and just see where all that went. Sometimes books start just with a character, and then sometimes with a character and a small premise. And this one pretty much started with the character. Let's open with this. And also wanted to write a book which had a little bit, I've written in multiple genres, sometimes within the same novel, often within the same novel. But I couldn't say that I've very much trafficked in the area of fantasy. And this book takes that extra half step into that area as well, which was something that motivated me about it.
Fantastic. And you talk about this character that gave life to the book, and that character's name is Vida, I believe. And as soon as I saw that name, it really jumped out for me because completely coincidentally, I've been working on a project called Passivida, and it stands for Making Peace with Life. The Vida is that. Where did the name Vida come from? Did you go back to kind of the Latin, and was there a purpose behind that?
Yes, the book in some ways deals with the issues of mythology, and that myth is never past. Myth of the past inform the current world, less obviously than anything you see on social media, but it's true because myths were the first ways we tried to explain the world to ourselves. And those explanations still, while the gods of Olympus are not real, many of the things in that mythology of a way of trying to explain the nature of the world are valid and remain valid now and informed everything that followed that. All of the faiths, all of the philosophies sprout out of that. And I wanted to write a novel in which I don't say those myths are real. What I say is the inheritance of those myths is real. And Vida is pretty much an embodiment of that kind of female character that you saw in classic myths, Diana, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. And so she sort of fulfills that role in this novel.
Absolutely, and she's such a fascinating character. I love the depth in which you go into developing the character, and it just the novel just drew me in, like chapter by chapter. It just was sucking me in, and it was absolutely brilliant. Really recommend anyone who's a fan of your work. I mean, and again, it's like you say, it's a slightly different take for something. You've written so many novels. It's like, how do you must be sometimes thinking, what can I do that's like a new challenge and it's new? And what was the biggest joy you had from writing this book?
Writing about the natural world in a way that you don't see in novels that have suspense as a central element of them. It's usually just about, let's keep this thing moving. And you can keep it moving and yet nevertheless discuss the environment in which it occurs. Suspense novels largely are concerned with metropolitan environments or small town environments in which everyone in the town has secrets and that sort of story. But to set one so much in the natural world is not a common sort of thing. And I wanted to do that as part of the challenge. And her love of nature and her understanding of it and her deep, it's beyond just simply a love of nature. It's a spiritual connection. And to explore that in the course of all the more normal elements of a suspense novel, the threats that come down upon her from very bad people, was something of a challenge, how to balance those things so that you never thought, well, this is getting sluggish. And I found that it's like anything else. If you're passionate about writing it, it takes care of itself.
Yeah, I would say as, having read many books of people who are kind of wanting to place where this was, for me, it had the beauty of a novel like the Crawdads, that kind of beautiful nature, but then it had the excitement of Hunger Games. It was a perfect combination of those two, and then taking it. But also you talked about the spiritual aspect as well. And I think that there's, without obviously giving too many spoilers away, I felt that the animal connection was really fascinating. And you introduced that very early on in the novel. But is that something that you've kind of been fascinated by yourself in your life? this idea of animals and the connections with humans?
Well, if you're a dog lover, it's unavoidable. And we have had 3 golden retrievers who have, each one of them, changed our lives, each in a different way and each in a wonderful way. And so you begin to look into those eyes of a beloved dog and watch the behavior of that animal. And you start to see more intelligence than you ever quite imagined before. And certain certain things that are synthetic between our species. And so I would say partly my dog taught me how to write about the animals, the wolves in this story. There are wolves, there are dogs, there is an albino cougar or a mountain lion, and various other animals come through in the course of it. And I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question, but yeah, yes, it's I'm fascinated with the natural world, especially with animals that I think we underestimate a lot and ought to pay more attention to. I think I've actually written that if human beings were more like dogs, it would be a much better world.
Oh, exactly. You may have seen the meme floating around the internet that says, be the person your dog thinks you are. Mm-hmm. It just sums it up for me. No, I totally agree. And I think that I often feel that animals, and particularly, as a dog lover and a dog owner, myself, that connection, they almost have this sixth sense that we're not always able to tap into, and they have a view of the world that we don't really fully appreciate what they see and what they understand. And I love the fact that you kind of brought that connection out in the book, because I think for me, it's that mystery, isn't it? It's the awe and the mystery of what's actually going on and the things we don't yet really understand. I don't know if you've heard, but AI, for all of its joys and challenges, there's talk at the moment that AI may one day translate the languages of animals. They're currently doing tests on whale song and communication, so we'll have like a Google translator so we can talk with our animals, which completely blows me away. Absolutely brilliant. Now tell me a bit about the title as well, because The Forest of Lost Souls is one of the most beautiful titles I've seen in the last few years, and we've interviewed lots of authors. It really touched me. How do titles come to you? Do they just pop into your head, or do you have to kind of craft or work with them and bring them out at the end of the novel?
Sometimes it's right there at the beginning. I wrote a rather long novel called From the Corner of His Eye, and that was right there at the beginning of the novel, and I knew what it meant, how it was going to appear. So in this book, that was not my first title. I wrote the entire book on another title, and it wasn't right. And I knew it wasn't right. And my editor reacted very positively to the book, but said, this title isn't right. Right. And but then there it was in the last paragraph. I had written it as the final line of the novel. I think it's the final line. I just didn't recognize it until I had written it and I was proofreading it, and there was a general consensus that the title that was on it wasn't right. And then you look and go, well, right there is the title. It's in the very last paragraph of the novel. So either it's coming out of your subconscious or I don't know, but there it was. And some books, you start with the title. I have a book coming out early next year that is a comic novel. I've written a couple of flat out comic novels with suspense. And the title of that was there in the first instance. It's called Going Home in the Dark. And it reverberates through the novel in all kinds of ways and ties up in the last page very nicely. So sometimes it's there and other times you struggle with it. And sometimes you never quite get the title right. Or if you do, it's not as thrilling as you wish it were, but it's right. So you have to stay with it.
Brilliant. I love the fact that it was right there in the last paragraph, and it's almost like the whole book had to kind of form and marinate, and then boom. It's great. Absolutely brilliant. Now, one of the characters I really loved was the Seer. And the Seer has a lot of mystic wisdom. And I want to ask you this question straight up. Is there a part of you in that Seer? Because when I read it, I thought, wow, there's a lot of wisdom. And that's coming from you as the author, even though you're writing through the character. How much of the Seer?
I don't know that everybody who knows me thinks right away of the word wisdom. But There is a little bit there because I wanted, I knew the role of that fortune teller was pretty profound, but not in the normal way. And in the first moment that I knew that character, why she was there and what she was conveying, was the first question she asks everybody who comes before her is that you have to pay her with what you value least. And I thought, oh, I love this because there's almost no question that tells you more about somebody than that. Asking them what they value most, you don't know whether you're getting truth or, the latest little happy talk that you would see on morning television shows where celebrities are interviewed. But ask somebody what they value least, and that's what you expect for your payment. Is also kind of mystical, but also opens up a different kind of answer and a different kind of view of the person. And that character, the fortune teller, became much more important in the novel even than I originally thought, but not because she's in a lot of it. It's mostly always in flashbacks. I wouldn't call them quite flashbacks in this novel because past and future get mixed in an interesting way for me. But yeah, I guess there's a little her in me. Playing games with somebody is very much me.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think the character was really fascinating. And then there was another quote that I picked out, really jumped out at me when I was reading the book. And I'm going to read it actually, because I think it's a great idea that you've drawn out here. And you said the character said, another kind of character is to know yourself for what you really are, accept what that is, and correct those habits and attitudes that need to be corrected. You can't be a hero if you run away from the enemy or the truth of yourself. Now, that really hit me hard, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I want to actually ask you, Dean, though, obviously through this incredible career that you've had as an author, and we've got many aspiring writers that listen to this podcast every week. Through your own journey as an author, what have you discovered about the truth of yourself in this journey as an author?
Well, it took me a while to discover that I was often an idiot in my youth and believed things that were almost hopelessly stupid and clung to those beliefs. I'm not going to go into them, but I think it's pretty much normal in youth to be easily misled or to have made decisions based on too little information or on experience that is unique to you and not necessarily something that a belief can be generalized from. And it took me a lot of years to get to the point where I was comfortable with examining everything I ever believed in my 20s and coming to the opinion that, okay, you were a fool. Now straighten up and get your act together and think more carefully about everything you say and do. And that's one of the things that a career in writing can do for you, because you have to go out of yourself into these other people. And these other people aren't always like you. And it forces you to think a little bit, how do they think? And why do they think that way? And it opens you up to a reconsideration of many things that you have thought were done. And you look back on them and say, well, I screwed that up. Let's just not screw anything up in the same way again. It's like Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So I sort of applied that to a morals perspective of your life.
That's fascinating as well. And I think that it's one thing that we've learned over the many years of doing this is that as an author, you put yourself in the shoes of other people, both, protagonist and antagonist, and you get such a deeper understanding of how people's minds work and the reasons why people do things, the reason why even the antagonist thinks they're the protagonist in their own story. So it's interesting to see how that's kind of influenced you over the years as well. Now, you also had another line. There was another line in the book that was about the burden of the future, which I found interesting. You said he realized that knowing the future can be a burden too heavy to carry. And I think about where we are in time right now and all the things going on in the world. But I wanted to ask you, Dean, what hopes do you have for the future? You know, as you sit and you write these novels and you kind of pull all these different aspects of what's happening in the world into your books, what hope do you have? What do you see to look forward to in the future?
Well, we're living in a particularly dark time, it seems to me, in many, many ways. And you have to have hope that as much as we're messing everything up or a very significant part of everything, we've done that before and then recovered. And my hope is that the sense of reason in humanity, the sense of that we are more than animals, that there is a spiritual element to life, will come back to us in a way that we've lost. Humanity seeks spirituality everywhere and finds it in odd places. Right now, I'm afraid a lot of people find it on that phone.
Yes.
And it becomes, you watch people out in public where they sit in a restaurant eating the whole time with the phone. And there is some sort of spiritual satisfaction going on there, but it's onanistic actually, and is not a satisfying relationship with something bigger than yourself. I just finished yesterday a novel that's set from 1930 to 44, and it was fascinating to go back into that period and do the research and see that as difficult and spooky as things may seem in our time, they seem no less so in the 30s. There were terrible things going on. Now, I'm not even talking about the rise of Hitler. There were just all sorts of odd and terrible things arising, eugenics and everything related to that. And yet we got past it. Some of those things are still with us. They get reborn and they come back again in different form. But we didn't let it destroy us at the time. We regained our reason and our balance. And it was just kind of fascinating it would start with something simple like, was there Kleenex in 1930? So you have to find that out. Yeah. But that leads you to certain other issues. Even Kleenex can lead you to other questions. And this book took me longer, largely because of getting lost in that period. I had books stacked all over my office and references, and it can become fascinating to see how we change and then don't change and then slide back and then change again. And there's something reassuring about that, but there's also something frustrating about it. You would think we actually make progress, but we don't. We make technological progress, but we're still the same human beings that we always were.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It does sometimes feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And I read a book called The Fourth Turning that showed, that goes back through history, and it talks about how you can just see the cycles in civilization just repeating themselves over and over. And now we're doing it in a technological world with all of its challenges and beauties. But so much rich work as an author. I mean, it's a great time to be alive and be an author, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm going to dive in quickly with a listener question, because you talked about research, and one of our listener questions was on that topic. Katie Wells wanted to know, she said, Dean, how much of when you're doing your research, how many times do you fall down the rabbit hole and disappear only to come back days later? Does that happen often for you?
It can happen, but I have a a good friend who is a successful writer who could have been much more successful. And he does exactly that. His books are always set in a historical context, in a historical period. And I have for decades watched him do his research, and he will start to read something, and it would be something he needs to know for an upcoming scene. So he pauses and he finds a book or he finds various resources. He starts reading. And 3 months later, you ask him, how is that book going? He's in the same scene, but not because he's been writing. He went down that rabbit hole. So I had that example set before me since my 30s. And I always stop at some point and think, no, wait a minute. You don't need to know everything about the period, because that'll be the rest of your life. There's going to be thousands of resources. What you need to know is something you know is true or correct. And as much as you can spare time to learn what's around it and then move on. So I don't tend to go down the rabbit hole. But it is interesting that when you research one thing, like, was there Kleenex then? And you write the paragraph and you suddenly stop and think, wait a minute, would that character have used that phrase in 1930? And one thing does keep leading to another. But I've sort of disciplined myself. As soon as I find out the answer to that question, I stop and don't go forward. Otherwise, I probably would still be on this book after 10 months.
Well, and also testament to the amount of books you've written as well. I think, like you say, you can spend 3 books worth of writing just researching for your one book. And at the end of the day, it's about getting the books out there, isn't it? So that you can share them with the world.
Yeah, it's what do you need to know for just verisimilitude of the period? And then there are research questions about, well, how do people think about this subject? That's more complicated. And those take more time to make sure your characters are behaving within the context of their period and not acting like somebody from 2020 backing 1930. And those issues require a little more effort. But still in all, people are people. The human heart is deceitful above all things. Certain things don't change. And you have to keep that in mind as you research how the behavior was in that time too.
Brilliant stuff. Now, I don't know if you're a fan of the Hobbit movies, Peter Jackson's trilogy, but our previous guest was Thorin in The Hobbit, Richard Armitage. And Richard has a question for you, Dean. You're rubbing shoulders with the Hollywood celebrities here. Richard really wanted to know, and it's a common question you may get asked, is do you tend to be a plotter or a pantser when you sit down to write a new book?
I don't care for the word pantser, but that is what I am. If those are the two choices. I used to write outlines before I began, and it was always frustrating because the book never held to the outline. And if you tried to hold it to the outline, you had less of a book than you could have had because your creativity starts coming up with alternate movements. And the first book, I said, no outline, was a book called Strangers. It was about 300,000 words, so it wasn't a short novel. And it had a large cast. And interestingly, it became my first hardcover bestseller. And since then, I have never plotted anything. I start with a character like Vita and a situation or just a premise, an issue. And I start and I see where it'll go. And I say to young writers, the wisest thing I ever did was give my characters free will. And they say, well, what do you mean? I say, I'll let the character decide where the story goes. And they say, well, you can't do that. You're creating the character. Oh, yes, you can. If the character becomes real to you, they start doing things. You'll be typing along thinking you know what you're about to type. And it's one of the eeriest and most wonderful things about writing. They will say or do something that will make me stop. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. No, that's altogether wrong. I learned quite a long time ago now that on those moments, embrace them. Let that character do what that character seems to want to do. And you're going to go somewhere richer, more interesting, and more complex than you'd ever thought in an outline, or that you would have done if you tried to move that choice of that character to something that you had preconceived. I remember in a book called Life Expectancy, the first opening, basically, of the book is in a expectant father's lounge in a hospital. And I knew that it starts with the grandfather of our lead character. And he's in this expectant father's lounge with one other person at like 2 a.m. And the other person is going to be his nemesis throughout the novel. But I didn't know who that other person was. And as I would end, my grandfather of the lead, he's going back and forth from the expecting father's lounge, where his wife is about to give birth in that wing, down the corridor to the other wing where his own father is dying from a stroke. So he's going back and forth like this. And the person he's in that lounge with part of the time is going to be haunted the rest of his life and his child's life. And I didn't know who that was. And as I was typing it, I started typing and something about the person in the other chair was chain smoking, and I started to type the word clown. And This sounds like I'm possessed when I'm writing, but you are, maybe by your own subconscious. But I stopped and I said, clown? I can't have a clown be the nemesis of this character thing. And that was where I thought, no, stop, wait a second. Don't put him in big shoes and a red nose. Make him an Emmett Kelly kind of clown. That was a clown 50 years ago, dressed in that shabby suit. And He was not clown outfit, but he was a clown. And to bring the circus background in through him. And after that book was finished, which is one of my favorite of my own, it would never have been a book that worked if he had been anything else but a clown. And so where did that come from? And that's why I said, when something comes up with a character that seems a little out there, just go with it. You can always write the pages, and when it isn't working, you can back up. But if you never give it a chance, you don't know what it might have been.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. It almost feels like you're talking about the spiritual experience of being an author, like this idea of it's like you're connecting and creating these characters, but then giving them a life of their own. It's almost like you're connecting on a spiritual level with this life of somebody who we think we're creating, but maybe on some level you're tapping into something there. Do you tend to get that sense when you find those moments happen?
Do I get what?
Do you get a sense that you're kind of tapping into some kind of spiritual experience when you're actually writing those characters?
Yeah, yes. I do at times, and at times we asked earlier about ideas. Do I start with this? And I said I start with ideas. Ideas come from all kinds of places, but once in a while, ideas come to you in such a way that you say, okay, this is spooky, but I don't think that came from me. And the book I just finished was one of those. I was halfway through another novel that I thought was the first of the trilogy. And I don't stop halfway through a novel and go write something else. I never have done that. Once you invested enough to get halfway, you just have to go forward. But I was just at my desk. I can't remember the exact circumstances. And the idea for this novel I just finished just came into my head almost full on. And I sat like this and I thought, well, if I can write it, it's too good not to do. And if I can't write it, I've got to do it right now. And I actually at that moment just went, thank you. And I looked at the ceiling and said, thank you. It was, and this novel is so different than what I've done before. And I think extremely powerful. Now, there is a risk that my agent and my editor are going to say, what the hell have you done? Because it is very different. But I was fascinated with every inch of the way, fascinated with the character, moved myself to tears at times, laughed out loud at times. And it took longer to get the number of pages I got because I've written 900-page novels. This is 380. It's in the realm of normality.
It's a mere novella, Dean. It's a mere novella in your world.
Yeah, it's only 125,000 words. So, but it took me longer, not just because of the period research, but because of wanting to understand that very different character as deeply as I could. So yeah, there are times you feel you're in touch with something else. You can say it's a higher power. I know writers who actually feel that way, would not say it publicly, but feel absolutely that way. Or it's that you're in touch with some capacity within yourself that you're incapable of defining, recognizing, or controlling. It's like sometimes when you're writing, you go into what athletes call the zone, that you cannot do any wrong. I rewrite pages 20, 30 times. And then when you have this moment, I'm trying to think now, psychiatrists call it, or psychologists call it something other than me. So, but I've had the experience of suddenly I'm seized by the power of the story or the character. And if I would produce 5, 6, 7 pages in a 10-hour day, I suddenly produce 15. And I go, none of this can be good. So I come back then, it's because, as I said, I rewrite so much. And here I am going through each page twice rather than 20 times. I come back the next morning and read it with dread because I know it's probably useless. And there are those pages that I can't find fault with, even to the extent that there's no typo.
Now, I know, Dean, you've been quite open about your challenging childhood. And I wanted to ask you a question around adversity, because one of the things that I'm wondering through the career that you've had is when you look back on the challenging childhood that you had, how much of that actually created the person that you are today, and the wonderful career that you've had and all the amazing things that have come out of that? No doubt you've made a connection there, have you, in terms of how your life kind of was shaped through those experiences?
Well, as I've talked, my father was a violent alcoholic, later in life diagnosed as borderline schizophrenic with tendencies to violence, complicated by alcoholism. And then later still, after being sent to a psych ward for sort of strange public behavior, was diagnosed as sociopathic, which is pretty serious stuff. And yet, in terms of what that shaped, it was not one I wouldn't recommend it as a childhood. But I have said sometimes that if I hadn't had the father I had, I'm not sure I'd have had this career. Because I from early age had a determination that I'm not going to live my life the way we lived in this family. I am not going to live in permanent poverty. I am not going to become an alcoholic. I'm going to get out of this. And I think a lot of work ethic comes out of that kind of thing, of that kind of background. So it doesn't have to crush you. It can actually motivate you. And that's really a personal decision. And And when my dad was late in life, we moved to California, and he was still in Pennsylvania. And we finally had relief, because even then he would knock on our door at 2 a.m, drunk and stuff. And we thought, 3,000 miles, he's not going to be knocking on our door. You couldn't send him, well, you could send him money, but it wouldn't make any difference. He'd spend it in the bar room buying everybody drinks the first day he got the check. And a friend called after we were in California, like 6 months, and said, your father is dying. He's destitute. You send him money and he doesn't use it. He needs to be with you, to be taken care of. My wife and I had to have a real serious conversation about that, because this is life-wrecking kind of stuff. But we thought, well, if I abandon him like he abandoned us, I've just done what he did. So we have to do this. But he's not going to be here more than a year. So we brought him to California, put him in an apartment, and he lived 14 years.
Oh my gosh.
So I had the example even after I was writing. And I think in some strange ways, as difficult as that was, it helped keep me on track and saying, remember, this is what you could be, because this is what you came from. So, yeah, I think there are values to it, but there's a part of your life you lose, you can never recover. But then I think a lot of this good stuff came from how that eventually centered me, and not wanting to be like that.
And having those experiences as well, it brings out you can really write in an emotional way because you've had those experiences. Thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think it's also inspiring for many other people who maybe are experiencing something like that now, or have experienced it in their childhood and have never been able to take it and use it as a fuel, if you like, in terms of bringing so much amazing work to the world. It's quite unbelievable. And the fact that you were able to, look after your father, and the sense of almost forgiveness there, it's a very, very beautiful thing to hear. So I just want to honor you for doing that.
Forgive but never forget.
Absolutely.
Yeah, forgive and forget doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Absolutely.
It's easier.
Fascinating. Well, Dean, we are so grateful for all the time that you spent with us today, and for all of the wisdom, the sage-like advice that you've shared with us as well. But I just want to take this opportunity as well to thank you, because, when you look at your career to date, it's been absolutely incredible what you've achieved, the amount of work that you've put out into the world, the amount of joy that you've brought readers, and publicists and publishing companies always like to shout about how many books authors have sold, and 500 million plus in your case. But I think about how many readers have been touched by your work, and that really, for me, shows the greatness of what somebody's done. So on behalf of everyone out there who's ever read any of your novels, who will be reading your novels for many, many years to come, I'd just like to thank you for all of the hours that you've spent at your desk, working on those manuscripts, trying hard to, rewrite those pages you talked about, because you really have given the world such an incredible legacy. And we're so excited to see what you continue to do in the future as well, Dean.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. And I often say, books saved me as a child. In that terrible house, in that terrible environment, I escaped into books. And so if somebody escapes into mine and it gives them hope in their life, that's exactly the best thing.
Brilliant. And right there is your legacy in writing. Dean Koontz, thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I'll come back anytime.
Thank you so much. Take care.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy.
And so what a fascinating interview. And thanks again so much to Dean for joining us and giving us all the wisdom of those many, many years of writing. And I do really highly recommend checking out The Forest of Lost Souls. I did read it in almost one sitting. Absolutely brilliant book. So this week, I'd like to say thank you to our star patron, which is the lovely Rebecca Powell. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to be a patron, you can pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And we have some wins to celebrate. The first big one, absolutely huge, is a win of a new anthology that was put together as the brainchild of Steve Gowland, J.M. White, and W.A. Leggett. And the book is called The Law of Consequences, which is an anthology which you can get on Amazon. And what's really interesting is the anthology has this great tagline. It's every action has a consequence, some good, some less so, others of pure darkness. And what's really exciting about this project that Steve and GM White and Will have put together is that it's basically consisting of amazing people like you, supporters and listeners of the podcast. And there's over, I think, 20 or so authors who have put this book together. So we've got Academy members and alumni, Kate Baker, Alex Waite, Karen Story, J.W. Atkinson, Jocelyn Saldoni, Kate Kenzie, and many, many more members of our BXP team and patrons, including Julian Barr, Andrew Chapman, Gareth Lewis, Trey Montague, Tommy Wills, JB Ralph, Morgan Delaney, Emanuela Decornor, and Andrew Guile, Richie Jackanowitz. And there's also some geezer called Mark Stay who's got a story there as well. So absolutely brilliant group of people that put this together. And we're celebrating because The Law of Consequences went to #1. They got their bestseller flag on Amazon. So do check it out, folks, and go and celebrate the incredible writing of all these amazing supporters and writers and Academy members within the Bestseller Experiment and Academy. And congratulations to you all. It was so fun watching all the buzz online when that book hit #1, and it was such an incredible group effort. So well done to you all. And also a big congratulations to Zoe Richards, who's published her book Garden of the Heart. Now, if you're a long-time listener of this podcast, you will know that we've been kind of tracking all the incredible progress that Zoe's been making, and she's been working incredibly hard and had such this amazing build up to the novel, and it's finally out. So go support Zoe, pop over and check that out. It's already got, I think, a 4.5 star reviews on Goodreads, which is phenomenal. So congratulations to Zoe and to everyone else who kind of pushed and supported her along the way. Absolutely brilliant. And finally, Karen Story, who we did a interview with, our short story queen, if you remember. And if you think back to near the beginning of this year in January, I interviewed Amy Newmark of Chicken Soup for the Soul, and I challenged you all to see if you could get a story published in Chicken Soup for the Soul. Well, lo and behold, Karen's story rose to the challenge, and within the space of about 7 months, wrote and is now published in the new Chicken Soup for the Soul book, which is coming out very, very shortly, if not already out. So Karen, massive congratulations. This was a huge kind of lifetime bucket list, as I know is for many of you. And the great thing about Chicken Soup for the Soul is it's launched many New York Times #1 bestsellers careers. You know, they started out writing a short story and became part of this incredible community. And so Karen is now part of that. So very, very well done, Karen. She put up a really fun unboxing video of the books that she received. And just seeing the joy on her face was absolutely brilliant. So congratulations. And I hope it inspires you all to try as well. If you think back to the article, or the interview rather, today, Dean actually Dean Koontz started life by winning a writing competition back when he was kind of in high school. And that's really what started his career. So, amazing things can happen. So anyway, I hope you're all inspired this week to go for it and live your dreams. And if you enjoy the music on the Bestseller Experiment, I just want to remind you that the theme tune is part of my music project, Urban Myth Club. So go check out the band and maybe subscribe to us on Spotify. It's quite nice writing music if you're doing some kind of like peaceful, chilled out scene, or if you just need to kind of have something in the background. You can also watch a video of today's episode on YouTube. Just search for Bestseller Experiment or go to @Bestseller Experiment. And you can join us on socials. On Facebook, we're at Bestseller Experiment, and we're on the following: X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Pinterest at Bestseller XP on all of those as well. So a massive thank you to all of my team that have helped us put this week's episode together. Oh my gosh, you know who you are. There's a lot of you. Particularly thanks to JD and Liza for all of your work. And do check out today's show notes at the bestsellerexperiment.com website. And once you're there, do sign up to our newsletter for weekly updates, new episodes and exclusives. And you can also drop me a note by clicking on the contact form. And finally, if you haven't heard about the 200-word challenge, then pop over to 200wordchallenge.com. It is an amazing way to create a writing habit for life, and you can join thousands of other people who've written books using this 200-word challenge. And the big challenge for you right now is, can you win our first challenge and write at least 200 words a day for the next 5 days? That's it. Sounds very simple, but hey, it's harder than you think. Brilliant stuff, folks. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me today and spending time with Dean as well. And I just want to wish you all a fantastic writing week. And until next time, it's a goodbye from Mark DeVoe, aka Bookmark. Goodbye. Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life.
To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.